Hey and welcome to MTG CubeTube. My name is Sjoerd and this is the last episode of a 5-part video series in which we are building a budget-friendly 360 card cube from scratch that features a somewhat linear strategy for each of the 10 color pairs. We aim to stick to a $500 budget using the MTG Goldfish deck pricer, but if we go slightly over budget we won't be too worried about it. So far we have chosen the strategies for the 10 guilds and built a core collection of 24 cards for each of them. This leaves us with room for 120 more cards, 10 non-guild specific cards for each color, 45 lands and then 25 colorless cards. We built a wish list of cards that we came across when building the guild collections and that we thought would play well in this cube. Many of the final cards we'll add in this video will be from that wish list. The point of this video series is mainly to show how you could go about building a synergy-based cube, how you can find cards that work well with what you're doing, and what aspects play a role in card selection. In short, it's more about the process than the actual result. I'm not here to say you should build this here cube, but I hope to give people tools to build and tinker on their own. That said, I do think the resulting cube looks good, even though I haven't actually played with it yet. When I do, I'll report back in a future video. You can find the link to the full cube in the video description. We will first choose the monocolored cards, then artifacts or other colorless cards, and finally add the lands. For the monocolored cards, it's good to keep in mind that the cards we added so far are all there for specific synergies, and what we are currently lacking are bread and butter cards. So we'll be adding burn spells for red, counter spells for blue, removal for black, etc. And you'll notice that for these bread and butter cards, we're not holding back on power level. Cards like Ponder, Lightning Bolt and Swords to Plowshares are all the best of their kind, but are fine for the power level of this cube. We could save some dollars by choosing cheaper options, but people like playing with good cards and that's part of the appeal to cube, and I don't think that cards that are capped at being one-for-one answers, which many of these cards will come down to, will break the power balance in the cube. Apart from these types of cards, we'll look at cards that can play a role in multiple archetypes, like for example Jadelight Ranger, that works with Celestia +1/+1 counters, Golgari Self-Mill, and possibly even with the Power 4 or greater sub-theme in Gruul. If there's room left for a color, we'll consider including some standalone cards, like Approach of the Second Sun or Upheaval, that can be a strategy all by themselves. Cards like these add an extra dimension to the cube, apart from the 10 main strategies, and that can make drafting and playing the cube more interesting. So far we have selected 38 white cards, because we added 2 additional white cards when there were no appealing hybrid options for Orzhov and Boros. In the course of making the guild collections, we added these white cards to the wish list so we can use those as inspiration. This is the current distribution by card type. The white aligned strategies are all pretty creature centric, so we'd like around 28 creatures, and if we count these 4 token makers as creatures, we're at 26, so that's nearly there. By the way, I am not counting these token makers as part of the creature curve, because their token making is either conditional or more a secondary purpose of the card. And for white specifically, I want to take a good look at the creature curve, because especially the Boros and Celestia strategies care about this a lot, and I would like mono white aggro, possibly with a light splash, to also be viable for this cube. The curve currently looks like this, and the X at the end is Macaeus the Lunarch, which could be a 2-drop or anything above. This curve looks reasonable and doesn't need much work, except for the fact that we'd like more 1-drops, and we may not need this many 2-drops. For white aggro in a cube of this power level, we want 4 or 5 1-drops in 360 cards. These are the ones that are in, and if we add the 2 on the wish list, we get this group of 5. Mother of Runes would also play really well in this cube, and we'll add her to a potential upgrade list in case we have room left in our budget at the end. I would like to add one more creature, and since we have no 6-drops at all yet, adding that Sun Titan from the wish list feels right. It works well with what Azorius and Orzhov are doing, and is a sweet and powerful card on its own. I would also like to find room for Secure the Waste, and since we have more 2-drops than necessary, we can replace Hanweir Militia Captain from the Boros collection with it. So this gets us to 29 creatures, counting some of the token makers, which is plenty, and the final 7 white slots I'd like to use for some mass removal and spot removal spells, which are historically an important part of white's color identity. I would like 3 or 4 mass removal spells for this cube, but I don't want them all necessarily to be as efficient as actual Wrath of God, because in a creature-centric cube like this one, Wraths can be super punishing from many strategies. At the moment we have 2 mass removal spells in the cube already, Martial Coup and Dust to Dawn. And to be honest, Dusk to Dawn is very mediocre as a Wrath effect and was mainly added to the Orzhov collection because I wanted to add at least one recursive element in white, and Rally the Ancestors and Return to the Ranks didn't seem very good. But actually, neither does Dusk to Dawn. So here's our plan. We remove Dusk to Dawn from the Orzhov collection, stick Sun Titan in its slot because that's a nice fit, and then we still have 8 white cards to select. Let's go with 3 additional mass removal spells, but let's choose Winds of Abandon as one of them, actually a spot removal spell that can be inefficient mass removal in a pinch. Day of Judgment is our regular Wrath effect, and with Settle the Wreckage added to the mix, we have a nice and varied assortment of mass removal. I want the last 5 white cards to be spot removal, and white has some great 1 mana options in Source to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Oust and Condemn. Source and Path are around $3, so let's choose one of those and one of the more budget options, and we can add Source to Plowshares to the potential upgrade list. White also has some great all-purpose removal spells that can hit a variety of different permanents. This is just a sample of the options, and we get to choose 3, so let's go with good old Banishing Light and my personal favorites Unexpectedly Absent and Elspeth Conquers Death. Skyclave Apparition can go on the potential upgrade list together with Mother of Runes and Source to Plowshares. So these are the last 10 white cards that we're adding, and we also made these 2 replacements. For blue, the strategies are Blink, Theft, Spells and Ramp with Untap, Flash and Elementals as sub-themes, and this is the current card type distribution. In our quest for guild cards, we have added these blue cards to the wishlist. This is currently the creature curve, and given the non-aggro nature of most of the blue strategies, we don't need to worry about having enough 1 or 2 drops, but having this glut at 4 mana doesn't look very good. Some of the 5 drops can be cast for less mana, so let's not worry about those, but if we can replace 1 or 2 of the 4 drops with something cheaper, that would be great. We also want some additional creatures here, so our goal is to cut 1 or 2 4 drops and add maybe 2 2 drops and 2 3 drops. These are those 7 4 drops, and I'm especially looking at the first 3 that are all part of the Azorius Blink collection. Of these, Archaeomancer feels like the weakest card, Venser is the easiest to replace with something like Mana War, and Thassa has gone up in price since we included her and is actually no longer within budget at all. Venser seems like the best one to keep, even though that means blue no longer has a repeatable Blink enabler. Let's replace Thassa and Archaeomancer with 2 cards from this group that are all reasonable Blink targets that don't break the bank. Of these, Mana War and one of the clone effects that were already on the wishlist feel like the best options. Of the copy creatures, Metamorph is the most versatile and iconic, so let's choose that over Glasspool Mimic. It's technically a 4-drop, but often practically a 3-drop, so that's not a problem. The Azorius collection still has plenty of Blink enablers, but losing Thassa means that those are now exclusively in white, and with Thassa we also lose one of the few repeatable Blink effects in the cube. Possible replacements are these 3 cards, with Closet being the closest to Thassa, and the one that we should think of while choosing artifacts. Crystal Shard doesn't blink, but self-bounce also counts, and Deadeye Navigator is awesome when it gets to live for a few turns, but also has a price tag issue because of commander playability. Let's keep these 3 cards in mind to think about later. We wanted to add 2 more blue creatures, preferably 2 drops, and for those we could use Merfolk Looter that was on the wishlist, and Thieving Skydiver that fits mainly with what Dimir is doing, but could fit in any blue deck, either as a value creature or as a tempo play. This cube will not be very artifact heavy, but there will be enough good ones to make Skydiver playable. With these changes and additions, blue now has 22 creatures and the curve looks much better than before. Next, let's add some additional cantrips, card draw spells and counter magic. This is the counter magic that is currently in the cube. There are many great options to choose from, but I like adding actual counterspell because, well, it's actual counterspell, and Miscalculation is my favorite soft counter. I believe this is a reasonable amount of counter magic, and I like that many cards here are there for their guild synergies. Though, looking at this list, Misdirection actually just feels kind of bad to me. It fits the Dimir theft theme, but it's just too situational and will often just sit in someone's hand collecting dust. Let's remove it from the Dimir collection and replace it with that Thieving Skydiver that we just decided to include, so that frees up another blue slot. For 1 mana cantrips we currently have Opt and Preordain, and we want at least 1 more, maybe 2. Let's just add Ponder, which is probably the best 1 mana cantrip, and see if we have room left later for another one. For raw card draw, blue now has Cameras' Insight and Mystic Confluence, and I'd like to add 4 more. One of these Jace Planeswalkers, Midnight Clock because it's a fantastically fun card that more people should put in their cubes. I think even in the most powerful cubes it can be a valid inclusion. And then 2 of these Instants and Sorceries. I like Thassa's Intervention because it doubles as a counter, and I like Charter Course because a cheap card draw spell makes it less necessary to include another 1 mana cantrip. If we choose the original Jace Beleren as our Planeswalker source of card advantage, we are adding this set of 4. For a 360 card cube, this is a bit on the low side, but if you consider that we have a couple of creatures that draw cards in the Azorius collection, and that much of the Dimir card advantage is in stealing the opponent's things, I believe this is enough. This leaves room for 2 more blue cards, and I like one of those to be a non-guild specific build around or 1 card strategy. Upheaval or Patient Rebuilding are good examples of such cards. They make the game about them instead of one of the linear guild strategies. I want to include Upheaval because it's a sweet cube staple that can find a home in different strategies, although its most obvious home is in ramp decks. It's a very strong card though, and we should be willing to remove it from the cube again if it ends up being too powerful and eclipses what other guild strategies are doing. It's okay to take a bit of a power level risk here, knowing that we can always correct it at any time. For the final card, I would like 1 additional creature, preferably cheap, that fits maybe more than one of our themes, and Seagate Stormcaller fits that build perfectly. It's obviously at home in the Spells Matter deck, but it's not the worst blink target, and copying a removal, discard or even ramp spell is also not out of the question. That leaves no room for Crystal Shard or Deadeye Navigator that could fill up the hole left behind when we cut Thassa, but if we make sure that we add Conjurer's Closet to our artifact selection, I think that gets us there on the blink front. On the wish list, we had Torrential Gearhulk that can go straight to the potential upgrade list, together with the aforementioned Thassa. If we end up adding Gearhulk to the cube, we could replace Thassa's Intervention with Commit to Memory, because that's a sweet combination. You can cast a Memory Half with Gearhulk at instant speed, even though it's a sorcery. So these are the 10 non-guild specific blue cards we decided on. And we also made these 3 replacements. The Black Alliance strategies are Theft, Sacrifice, Aristocrats, secretly also Sacrifice, and Graveyard, and we have currently selected 25 creatures, so we don't need many more, and the mana curve looks fine. What Black is mainly lacking in are discard and removal spells, 2 core pieces of Black's color identity. So far we have these 3 discard effects, and these 3 removal spells, with the Elders Reborn nicely doing a bit of both. In a cube of this size, where creatures are as important as they are, I think we can easily go up to 9 or 10 removal spells, maybe including 1 or 2 mass removal options. We also want 2 or 3 additional discard effects. Since we only have so many slots, let's start by including Collective Brutality and Elspeth's Nightmare, that, similar to the Elders Reborn, do both things. That almost covers our discard basis, but I also want to include one of these 3 cube staples. Thoughtseize is outside our budget but could go on the potential upgrade list, but either of the other 2 would be a fine inclusion. For budget reasons, let's go with Duress, even though it's maybe more of a sideboard card than a main deck inclusion like Inquisition would be. That leaves us at 5 kill spells, and I think we should add at least 4 more. Black has very many options, and really any mix will do. I like including Heartless Act because of the tension with Celestia's counter theme, and Shriekmaw because it's just a great card, and the fact that it's an elemental and works well with the Golgari or Seven Rector strategies is just gravy. I wanted at least 1 removal spell that also cleanly kills Planeswalkers, even though there aren't that many in the cube, and for that I chose Murderous Rider, and for the last one I like Hagra Mauling, because I like diversity and we don't have any double face spell lands in the cube yet, so this is a nice spot for one. I would also like to add 2 black cards that can deal with multiple creatures at once. The best black mass removal spells are not in our budget range, but these 10 would be fine cards to add. Though not the cleanest mass removal spells, I think both War of the Spark cards would fit this cube really well. They each do something unique and feel more exciting than Languish or Bontu's Last Reckoning, though those would also be good inclusions. That leaves us with room left for 1 additional black card, and like with blue, I would enjoy a card that can be a non-guild specific build around. On our wishlist we have Bolas' Citadel and Commander Dreadhorde, and both would be great for this slot. They both fit in multiple guild archetypes, but they can also be the focal point of decks or games all by themselves. We only have room for 1, and the more budget option would be Commanded Dreadhorde. However, we could include both if we replace Whip of Erebos from the Golgari collection with Command. I didn't really like Whip anyway, so let's do that. If we look at our wish list, we see that we've added or considered many of these cards, but I'd also very much like to try and find room for some of these 4 creatures. Of the 5 drops, I like Cavalier a bit more than Doom Whisperer because it fits more cleanly in 3 of Black's archetypes. And of the low drops, I prefer Pack Rat because apart from Golgari applications, it's a louder 1-card strategy than Crypt Breaker, and I think that's a good thing here, and it also doesn't hint at a zombie tribal theme that doesn't exist in this cube. To try and make room for these 2 cards, I went through the Black Guild collections to find cards that felt out of place, and these 2 from the Golgari collection stood out to me. Order of Midnight doesn't feel on par with the cube's power level, and Deathrite Shaman is mainly good in a cube with fetch lands, and really doesn't seem like a good fit here. Cavalier of Night and Pack Rat both sort of fit the Golgari theme, at least well enough, though Cavalier is clearly also a sacrifice card for those guilds. So let's just make these 2 replacements and call it a day. So this is then the full set of 10 non-guild specific black cards, and we made these 3 replacements in the Golgari collection. The red guild strategies are Spells Matter, Sacrifice, Go Wide Aggro, and Ramp with Size Matters, Landfall and Elementals as mini themes. This is the current distribution by card type, and this is the creature curve, if we count 3 mana Chandra as a 3-drop. If we want red aggro to be viable, then we want at least 4 1-drops total. We wanted 5 of them in white, but red having burn spells means its aggro plan leans less heavily on having the perfect creature curve. The rest of the curve looks fine and we don't need to add many additional creatures, but we could add a few. We have 2 excellent 1-drops on the wishlist, so let's simply add those. The other 2 creatures on the wishlist are Bone Crusher Giant and Runaway Steamkin that both work well with a couple of our themes, so let's add them as well. That leaves us with 6 more cards to choose, and the first thing I'd like to make sure of is that red has an appropriate amount of direct damage spells. This is what is currently in the cube, and we can do with at least 5 more burn spells. 10 still isn't a lot, but we don't want to use all our remaining 6 slots on just burn. Magic has a huge amount of burn spells to choose from, and as with the black removal spells, any mix of decent power level cards will do. I like to go with this group of 5. The first 3 are just very powerful and efficient cards, and it's nice to have a red card that can cleanly deal with artifacts. Devil's Play counts as 2 spells, which works well with the Is It Spells Matter strategy, and is some nice reach for a ramp deck, and Stoke the Flames fits the Go White theme of Boros. So now we added 4 creatures and 5 burn spells and we have 1 slot left. I like that to be Experimental Frenzy, that gives red a unique effect and is a nice card for aggro red decks to build around. I think it'll play really well in this cube. So this is our final set of 10 red cards and we've made no further changes. For green, the guild strategies are Ramp, with Elementals, Landfall, Size Matters, Untap and Flash as sub-themes, +1/+1 counters and Graveyard Stuff. The total number of green cards is 37 because we added an additional green card instead of a hybrid card in Gruul, and this is the type distribution for those 37 cards. The creature curve, in which I'm also counting these 3 cards, looks a bit top heavy, but Ramp is an important part of green in this cube, so that shouldn't be a huge concern. We do, however, need to make sure that we have enough actual ramp cards to make them all playable. So far the cube contains these ramp cards, 3 non-creature ramp spells and 8 mana creatures. This is 11 total, and in a cube of this size that is a fine amount, but I'd like to add 1 additional mana elf in Llanowar Visionary. Adding an additional 1 mana elf felt a bit too much, but Visionary bridging the gap from 3 to 5 mana and helping ramp players to find gas seems excellent. This is a lot of ramp, but I feel the green strategies can use it. These are the green cards on the wishlist, and we could add any or all of these to the cube. Unsurprisingly, they are all creatures. Creatures are simply where green's strengths are, and many green creatures serve other purposes than just being bodies. They make mana, or gain life, or destroy artifacts, etc. Green already has a ton of creatures though, so let's try to add 3 non-creatures and pick 6 creatures from this list. And here comes a hard decision that is actually also an easy one. We currently already have 5 green 5 mana creatures, and 8 if we count Jegantha, Garruk and Spider spawning. This already feels like too many. We chose all of these for specific guild reasons, and because of that I don't think we want to cut any of them. So with pain in my heart we will not include Thragtusk or Acidic Slime in this cube. We can, however, add all the remaining 6, because they all do good stuff for various guild strategies. For the last 3 cards, I want to make sure that we've covered our bases for 2 things that are an important part of Green's color pie. Dealing with artifacts and enchantments, and creature selection, either by finding a specific creature from the deck or from the top X cards, and then putting that creature into play or in the player's hand. For dealing with artifacts and enchantments, we now have this set of 3, not a whole lot. And for creature selection we have these 3 very similar cards in the Golgari collection and Genesis Ultimatum on the opposite end of the spectrum. For the small put in hand selection we're sort of covered, but I'd like one larger effect and maybe an actual way to tutor a specific creature would also be nice. Most of the big effect options on this list are not in our budget range, but then I did find these 2 that can do the job for us. Primal Command can search for a creature but can also deal with annoying permanents. And Genesis Hydra, though not actually a non-creature spell, does a good enough imitation of some of the out-of-budget X spells with its cast trigger. The fact that it also leaves a creature behind, with +1/+1 counters even, is basically a bonus. Let's add Green Sun Zenith to the potential upgrade list. For the last slot I want a spell that effectively deals with artifacts and enchantments, but instead of choosing one of these, let's include Beast Within instead. It has a downside, but it's more versatile and the flexibility of killing your own creatures might come up with the mere trying to steal things. This then is our collection of green artifacts and enchantment removal, and I think that's enough for a small cube like this, but when playing the cube we should keep an eye out for whether it feels necessary to maybe add more. Gemrazor and Reclamation Sage would be the first ones to look at. So these are our final 10 green additions to the cube, and we made no further changes. Next we have 25 artifacts to add. We have 16 artifacts on the wish list, and of those I'd like to immediately reject these 5. The first 3 are too expensive, but we can move Walking Ballista to the potential upgrade list. And because we have so few artifacts already, I want all of them to be truly colorless, so these creatures with a colored activation should go as well. These are the remaining artifacts on the wish list, and I'd like to add all of them because we put them on the wish list because they are sweet cards that help out with some guild strategies, and I think they are all fine fits for this cube. To be honest, there are hundreds of artifacts that could play a role in the cube, and the ones we're selecting here are simply cards that seem to fit the power level, can enhance our themes, or are just sweet cards. I think we should add 8 mana rocks to the cube, so that leaves us with 6 more slots for fitting, theme enhancing, or simply sweet, but budget appropriate artifacts, and these are my picks for those. The selection process for these isn't very interesting. I just selected cards that came to mind that I think would work well and fill a role. The only card that is here for a specific reason is Relic of Progenitus, because currently there isn't a lot of counterplay to graveyard strategies, and Relic is a clean way to address that, though I'm not sure it's even necessary. We don't want to add too many mana artifacts to this cube, because well, it's not a very large cube, and also ramp is a domain of green and an important part of its identity in this cube. Adding for example a full cycle of high quality mana rocks like the Signets or Talismans would be too much of a good thing for this cube. Instead, I'd like to add a set of 4 2-mana mana rocks, and then 4 that are a bit more expensive but add 2 or more mana at once, making it easier to play some of the expensive cards that we just added like Sundering Titan, Mere Battlesphere and Mightslaver. By the way, we do already have Heraldic Banner and Solemn Simulacrum that are also colorless ways to ramp. For the 2 mana rocks, I like this set, and of course Everflowing Chalice can also be cast for additional mana later in the game. For the more expensive mana rocks, I like these 4, and thanks to a reprint in Time Spiral Remastered, Coalition Relic is now pretty much within budget, where before it was a close call. So this then is our full set of 25 artifacts, and we're adding Walking Ballista to the potential upgrade list. At this point I uploaded the card list so far to Cube Cobra, and started doing a couple of drafts to get a rough feeling of how the balance between the guilds felt and how within each guild the pieces for the guild strategies could come together. Through doing this, I felt like these 7 cards were cards that I simply was never interested in picking, even if I was in the right deck for them. Stinkweed Imp and Winding Way simply felt too much of a good thing. Golgari needed some extra ways to close games, rather than enablers that didn't do much else apart from filling up the graveyard. and Avatar of Woe simply didn't feel good enough given how much it takes to enable it. So I decided to replace those three with Mire Triton, Mindwreck Demon and Multani. The black cards still enable the self-mill strategy, but with that effect now attached to a relevant body, and Multani is a great sticky threat that can get quite large and can help the self-mill deck close games before running out of cards. In drafting it felt like that is what the Golgari decks might be missing. Of the other cards, let's keep Geth and Summoner because they seem sweet enough if they work out, and let's also keep Falconer because the Selesnya collection is light on payoffs, and I can see games ending when this gets played, even though in the Selesnya decks I drafted I chose to go for more streamlined cards rather than synergy. We can keep an eye on these cards when we actually draft and play the cube in real life. But Pious Evangel is just not good enough, and I would like to replace it with our first equipment in this cube, Maul of the Skyclaves. I feel this is a nice aggressive card that any white deck in cube could potentially find a home for. It's not really an Orzhov card, but Orzhov felt like it had more than enough pieces to do its synergy thing, so losing one card to a more generic and more powerful white card seems fine. The final cards to add to the cube are lands. We have 45 slots, and for those I wanted 4 dual lands for each guild and then 5 others. Let's look at dual land cycles first. The best ones, and the ones most often used in powerful cubes, are ones that we cannot touch because of our budget. The original duals, shock lands and fetch lands. So let's look at a few other cycles. According to the MTG Goldfish Deck Pricer tool, a full set of 10 pathways costs $45, a full set of temples is only 9, and the check lands are now $57 for all 10. These prices tend to change, so it's very possible that if you're watching this video at some point in the future, they're very different. The allied fast lands are currently $52, while the enemy ones are only $32. For the pain lands, the enemy lands are only $5 total, while adding up the 5 allied lands comes to $37, so that's quite a big difference. The full cycle of creature lands is a very reasonable $16, with the enemy ones actually being very cheap. And a full set of filter lands is a bit over $70, so we cannot touch those for this cube. For a really cheap option, we could use the bounce lands from original Zendikar block that cost close to nothing and are actually pretty sweet. The 5 allied Tango lands cost $8 together and have no enemy cycle. The allied reveal lands are $11 and the enemy ones from Strixhaven are currently around $20. And finally the allied cycle lands are $12 for 5, and these don't have an enemy cycle either. So this might be a good time to look at where we stand with our budget. At this moment, all the cards in the cube added together without the 45 lands cost $477 according to the deck pricer. I'm pretty sure that a few months ago when I started this video series, this was closer to 400 though, so that is a bit annoying. We have these 18 cards that currently cost more than $5, and Tradewind Rider and Lurrus are the only cards above $10. Tradewind Rider was $3 when we added it to the cube in the previous video and is now $12. Clearly Commander players all over the world have somehow suddenly realized that this is a cool card with limited availability. Lurrus was between $5 and $6 and has since more than doubled. We could spend time to lower the cost and find replacements for these 2 cards specifically, or for some of the other cards in this list that don't seem to deserve their price tag. Yahenni comes to mind. But our $500 budget target was mainly set as a reason to care a little about card prices and availability, and thus enforce the need for us to be creative in our card choices. I believe we're ending up close enough to that budget and that it has served its purpose. Also, since prices have gone up and will continue to change, revising the cube just to stay within budget every month or so seems unnecessary. According to our budget, we have $23 to spend on lands left, but we're clearly not going to stick to that. If you're building a cube, you might have some lands already, and you should probably start by including those anyway, and then later maybe upgrade if you feel you're missing something. That said, we're still building a budget-friendly cube, so we're adding budget-friendly land cycles. We're adding 4 lands for each guild, and I want at least 2 of those to come into play untapped, or at least conditionally. This is especially important for the aggressive color combinations. For tapped lands, I like the Zendikar bounce lands, or Karoo lands, and the creature lands. For untapped lands, I like the pathways, the enemy pain lands, and the allied Tango lands. With those, we're now a bit under $560. If we feel that the Karoo lands are just too bad for aggressive guilds like Boros, we could break the cycle and instead of adding Boros Garrison, add Inspiring Vantage. This is very reasonable, and I highly recommend doing this if you feel your cube needs it. To keep it more simple for this YouTube series though, I'll stick to full cycles or half cycles. I believe with these 40 jewel lands we have enough mana fixing. If we wanted more, we could add some of the budget lands that can search up a basic like Evolving Wilds, or maybe the cycle of Vivid lands. But instead I would like to add some utility lands, one for each color. The cycle of castles from Throne of Eldraine would be great for this, but Vantress is a bit boring and Garenbrig is a bit expensive, so I went for a more diverse mix. This only adds $6, and that means that at the time that I'm finishing up the text for this video, we exceeded our budget of $500 with a bit over $60, and I'm absolutely okay with that. And with that, we have finished building this cube. And as mentioned, you can find the full cube list on Cube Cobra. We earmarked these 8 cards as potential upgrades if budget wasn't an issue, and if I would add these cards, I would make these 4 replacements, and also these. And in that case, I'd also, as mentioned, replace Intervention with Commit to Memory. I also want to share a version of this cube where I include these 8 upgrades, improve the land situation a bit, and add 30 additional cards so that when you draft this cube with 8 players, you cannot be 100% sure that a certain card will always be opened. That is the version I intend to draft with my cube group in the coming weeks. I'm keeping this version still a bit budget friendly, but a bit less so than the 360 card version. For the extended version I want to replace the Karoo lands with the 10 Czech lands, and add these 3 lands as additional fixing. The other cards I'll add are a bit of a mixed bag. Some bread and butter cards to make sure we still have enough of a certain effect in this slightly larger cube, some cards mainly for specific build archetypes, and some standalone good cards. We're diluting some of the themes here while strengthening others, but since we're only adding 30 cards, I don't think we need to be very precise in keeping the balance right. If we'd add another, say, 60 to 90 cards, I'd be much more trying to make sure all 2 color strategies retain the same level of support, and keeping the right balance of enablers and payoffs. I'll add 4 or 5 additional cards for each color, including some artifacts with colored activation cost, and 4 colorless cards. For white, I'll add Bodyguard back in to maintain 1-drop density, and Mana Tithe that does something unique for white. Elite Spellbinder is a nice blink target, an approach we already mentioned previously as a 1-card strategy that works separate from the guild stuff. For blue, I'm adding Thassa again. I was going to add an additional 1-mana cantrip, but decided that multiple choice can fill that role while being a much more fun card. I wanted an extra permission spell, and I just like Arcane Denial, so I'm choosing that one. Impatient Rebuilding is another 1-card strategy, but can also simply function as a card draw engine. Vralkan's Shackles also counts as a blue card and is a nice tool for the Theft deck, or any deck that can play a lot of islands. Gilded Drake would also be sweet for this slot, but is way out of budget. And another card I considered was Emery, that makes a nice combo with Mindslaver, but I think we're a bit too artifact light to make that viable, though it's close. In black I'm adding Sedgemoor Witch and Plum the Forbidden, that are great with all the sacrifice or go white business. Languish and Inquisition are nice bread and butter cards, and we scrapped the Scrounger earlier, but I like adding it back in here. Red gets an additional 1-drop, a big elemental, good old Flametongue Kavu that someone might want to splash in a blink deck, and Anger of the Gods, red's only board wipe in this cube. For green I wanted Pelt Collector for the Countess deck, Gemraiser as additional artifact and enchantment hate, Turntimber Symbiosis as a big creature finder. To be honest, this card was more expensive when I recorded the earlier bits of this episode, otherwise it would have been included already, and Birthing Pod because this cube is so well set up for it, and by now we've let go of our budget anyway. I'm also adding 3 mana Vivian to give the Flash theme some additional legs. For the last 4 cards I'll add 1 additional Mana Rock, Animation Module for the +1/+1 counter deck that can probably use the help, Ugin as a nice top-end Planeswalker, and Cockroach Librarian that is a very fun card to draft with, and I highly recommend everyone to add this to their cubes and then make sure it's in the first pack so that it can do its thing during the whole draft. I've uploaded this slightly pimped version of the cube to Cube Cobra as well, and you can find the link in the video description. And that's really finally all I have for this video series. Thanks for sitting it out until the end, and I hope these videos have been useful for your own cube design. If you have any questions or comments or topics that I should make a video on, then please feel free to reach out in the comments. You can subscribe if you want to be alerted when I release videos in future, and of course liking this video is greatly appreciated as it will help more people find this content through the YouTube algorithms. Thanks again for watching and hopefully see you next time.